Hi, everyone. First of all, I would like to thank you for agreeing to participate in the Digital RESI conference in the diagnostics panel. And the RESI panels are focused on an audience of startups to raise funding and make relationships. We hope that these panels will have insights to share with startups on how to get through the process and make a deal. So the agenda for today is, I think it would be great for everyone to give a brief introduction of yourself and your background in your firm. And let's start from our moderator, Nat.
Thanks, Jessica. I'm Nat Brin, a partner in VC23 and Vital Venture Capital. And we invest in early stage diagnostic companies, also invest in biotech and life science tools, research tool companies, and various other biotech technology companies, and selectively therapeutics. We've invested about 45 million into 26 companies to date. So with that, I'll turn it over to our panel who can introduce themselves. We've got a great panel from a number of very active early stage life science investor firms. Bill, you'd like to start off?
Yeah, hi, I'm Bill Hune. I get to wear two hats. I'm on faculty at University of California, San Francisco in the Department of Lab Medicine, and I'm a venture partner at Genoa Ventures. And Genoa Ventures is, our thesis is investing at the intersection of biology and technology. We love seed early stage companies that are in this space. And I met the partner there, Jenny Rook, who several years ago, investing in cytometric technologies, which is my background. And I'll leave it there.
I'll move on to Illumina Ventures.
Hi, this is Yang from Illumina Ventures. So my background is in molecular biology. So I've been with Illumina Ventures for 2 years now, associate at the moment. And I think it's important for us always to remind people that we're a separate entity from Illumina Corporate. So despite carrying the Illumina name and investing in great genomics companies in Series A and B, we are a separate legal entity. So we can invest a lot broader than what strategically might be interesting for Illumina Corporate. So we have some money in the funds that we invest out of, some money from Illumina and some money from other investors as well. So yes, as I mentioned, we focus on genomics, but in terms of areas, we do invest in diagnostics companies, research tools, and therapeutics. We tend to do Series A, Series B. If it's really exciting genomics technology, we definitely look at seed stage companies as well.
Thanks, Yang. Thanks, Yang. Lily.
Hi, I'm Lily Kim. I'm a partner and chief scientist at OS Fund. And my technical background is in microfluidics and lab on a chip. For the past so over 10 years, I've focused on early stage commercialization of science. OS Fund was founded in 2014 by Brian Johnson and Jeff Klunzinger. Brian seeded the first fund with 100 million, and we're currently progressing toward a close of our new fund. We invest in scientific platforms across a number of areas, including synthetic biology, computational drug discovery, diagnostics, materials. Typical check size anywhere from 1 to 15 million, and we invest in seed through Series C stage companies. We will sometimes lead or follow depending on the situation. And I am based in San Diego. We have a distributed team across Chicago, San Francisco, LA, New York.
Thank you, Lily. And last but not least, David.
Yeah, so David Cruikshank at Arch Venture Partners, based in Chicago. We are a 35-year venture capital firm now. Our interests are in life sciences only nowadays. And we just closed our 10th fund. So that's given us plenty of powder to work on new opportunities. That was a $750 million fund. And there's also a side fund of similar size We're an early stage investor, so we like to get involved at the seed and Series A stage primarily, almost always leading the first investment that we do. But those investments can be small as $500,000 into as large as 10 or more. It just really depends on what the company needs. And we have offices around the country, and we invest in all kinds of companies, from therapeutics to diagnostics to research tools, also synthetic biology, aesthetics, so a number of different areas, and excited to be here.
Thank you. Well, thank you all for joining. First question in our preparatory session, Bill Hyun asked or mentioned that the 800-pound elephant in the room was maybe 8,000-pound elephant in the room was COVID-19 and the impact on that. So I want to ask the panel to comment on how the current pandemic has impacted them. And Bill, let's start it off with you.
Yeah, I think COVID-19 has sort of highlighted so all sorts of different trends. It's brought together this intersection of physicians, healthcare innovators, informatics, enterprise solutions, and we've just had some very rapid transformation, sort of seismic shifts, things that normally would take years, sometimes in a product development cycle or a vaccine development cycle, or a testing cycle, are now taking months. A device to do COVID testing, just the antibody testing alone would normally have taken, a good year to 18 months, and we're getting it done in weeks, which is phenomenal. We've had to relax some of the traditional bureaucratic barriers that may have been there, FDA approvals, how we do QC, QA. So there's lots of interesting, pieces that we have initiated to flatten the curve, to protect our most vulnerable, that have been somewhat innovative, and we'll see if those trends sort of hold as we go forward, post-COVID.
Great, thank you. Yang, what are your thoughts?
I think one of the most exciting things is actually seeing lay people discussing, COVID diagnostics, right? People talking about molecular versus antibody testing, and people that would have never thought about these things probably before, suddenly becoming at least, for personal reasons, experts in technologies. And I think, diagnostics really to the forefront. I mean, it's coming to the mind of people, and people really thinking about, how testing can help us get back to work, get back to school. And I think that's a great development. And, despite the initial, just looking at the public markets, just despite the initial kind of dip in the public markets, I think healthcare in general, but diagnostic companies in particular have weathered this storm really well. Obviously, the ones that provide solutions to the COVID, to the SARS-CoV-2 virus in particular have fared very well. But I think in general, it just makes the whole sector just become more prominent, and people value diagnostics much more, which I hope, again, to put Bill's point, is something that can be kept post this pandemic as well.
Good comments, are very encouraging for diagnostic companies. Lily and then David, comments on this?
This is a pretty general comment, but it's been really exciting to see how the scientific community has come together so quickly and risen to this challenge. And it seems that the amount of collaboration and information sharing is at another level compared to before. So yeah, it will be interesting to see what happens in the in the coming years, and if that continues at that level. And also, I think around the idea of lay people, I think it has been really exciting to see that as a topic of discussion. And it also makes us think about what are the things that we need to think about carefully in terms of diagnostics and how they're interpreted. by individuals, and what does that mean to be bringing these diagnostics into people's homes, and how do we do it thoughtfully?
Great, thanks. David?
Yeah, so a lot of great comments there. I guess I would just add that, you know, it's great to see the kind of public-private partnership that we've seen. You know, I imagine in a kind of a post-COVID environment, things will go back to normal, and you'll go back to the long regulatory review processes. But you know, right now, where your companies can potentially take advantage of that, that's a great thing to be able to accelerate your progress. And we've seen with our companies, you know, an interest for companies that had the technology to deploy, you know, jumping into the COVID opportunity and trying to find ways to address it, whether it's from a therapeutic side or from a diagnostic side or from a research side. So I think there's, you know, lots of opportunities. And we view it mainly as a kind of existing company play, not so much a new company jumping in, because existing companies tend to have a lot more resources, which they could potentially apply towards a COVID opportunity. So that's how we view it, as mainly our existing portfolio companies are already well funded, can then pivot quickly and jump in using, you know, the great collaboration that we just heard about.
Makes sense, makes sense. So let's, jumping from COVID, but tying it in, and David, I think you had brought this forth as a potential topic. You know, early stage companies are always looking to get pointers on how to fundraise. What are the best practices? What are key tips and strategies to pursue when looking for early stage capital, particularly that first round of capital? In this COVID environment in particular, perhaps each of you could think of one tip or piece of advice you would give to an early stage company. And I know we all may be thinking of similar things. So, you know, let's each try to pick a different tip, obviously. David, let's start with you.
All right, cool. Yeah. So I think in investing and in you know, trying to search for capital, one tip that I think serves well normally, but in particularly in this environment, is to use relationships to find sources of capital. In this point of time when we're obviously not traveling like we used to, not having face-to-face meetings like we like to, or at least not in-person ones. Maybe we're doing these video conference ones. It's more important than ever to have kind of use existing relationships to create conversations around raising capital. So I guess that would be the first tip. I won't take others so that folks have things to talk about.
Okay, Lily.
I agree, and I would actually expand on that and say, maybe don't be afraid to reach out to new contacts as well. It's kind of a weird situation we're in right now where people aren't traveling as much, and so in some sense, if you are in a location, maybe you're in a location which doesn't have as many investors. Now everybody is in a location, their own home, which is the same as the others. So maybe don't feel shy about trying to reach out to people in other locations that you normally might not have as much access to.
That's a good point. It's an opportunity, actually. Yang, what is your tip?
I think coming back to the relationship piece that David mentioned at the beginning, I think it is very important, even if you don't know the people yet, to just build the parts, or talk about the parts that you would have done anyway on a remote basis in many cases, right? I mean, I'm talking about your technology, going through a lot of things you can do without this personal meeting piece, right? And possibly have that, once the situation relaxes a bit. So instead of doing the personal meeting up front, do some of the more technical stuff up front and then do the meeting later. So kind of catching up once you can travel, once you can get in close contact. I think the other thing, and I'd like to hear the other people's opinion on this, is, if we're still in a situation, 6 months from now, and we can't meet people, right? At some point, I guess people have to jump over this consideration and start making deals, even if you haven't met the people yet. So I'm just wondering whether that would actually happen, right? If you get the references, if you know those people from via other contacts very well, and you trust them, just by having met them on video before, whether, you know, in an environment, these kind of deals might actually happen.
It's a good question. We'll come back to that, but Bill, let's finish off the point on pieces of advice for the fundraising process.
Yeah, I think, you know, everybody, before we just hit on some really great points, you know, I'll just sort of reiterate, I think, you know, the ability to build these collaborations, I mean, pardon the pun, but collaborations are Zooming. I mean, you have that ability now to do, you know, faster iterations on design. There's the ability to build partnering on testing, to think about how you're going to validate your minimal viable products, you know, and it can happen, I think, faster now. And you know, reaching out and sort of finding expertise is an exercise now done in your, you know, your home office, where sort of, as David mentioned, you don't have to travel necessarily to have those in you know, on-site meetings. You know, we'll have to get to those eventually, but teeing all that up and you know, executing. And I've seen the most effective portfolio companies and those startups that have taken those initiatives are doing well. And you know, they're going, even though these times are a bit of a challenge.
Okay, thanks. You know, I would just add, and this is probably even more basic than all the pieces of advice, good advice that you've heard just now from our 4 panelists. But I would add, you know, to on qualifying the investors before you spend a lot of time with them. If you're a diagnostic company, make sure they consider diagnostics, and ask a few questions about what kinds of diagnostic companies they like to invest in and what they don't like to invest in, because I know it's very exciting to finally get face-to-face or Zoom to Zoom with a real live VC if you've struggled for that audience. But you know, make sure you're spending your time wisely by qualifying them. You know, do you invest in diagnostics? Do you invest in my kind of diagnostics? Do you invest in my stage? You know, and there's a lot of research you can do, whether it's through Crunchbase or PitchBook or any number of other sources, to find investors that fit with your industry, with your niche in the industry, with your stage, with your location, you know, so that when you do invest the time to work with investors, that that you're going to get your biggest bang for your hour, because you'll spend a lot of hours fundraising, and you might as well make that efficient. But let's go back to the question that Yang raised. You know, are people considering investing when they've met companies only through Zoom? Are each of your funds active right now? If so, how active are you? And assuming you are active in diagnostics, because that's the area of our audience, maybe let us know what things you look for in a diagnostic company. Why don't we start this time, Lily, with you? So,
as mentioned, we are currently fundraising. So we are having an introductory meetings with companies, and we are waiting a close of our new fund to resume investing. In terms of the types of things we like to see in companies, so our focus is really scientific platforms. OS stands for operating system, and it's meant to be a metaphor for platforms. So we're really interested in diagnostics that could have a potentially very broad impact in terms of being able to apply to many different conditions or situations. And so we probably wouldn't invest in a diagnostic that was just looking at one single a single specific molecule or a single marker, but more in terms of a broader system.
Okay, thank you. David, how active are you at Arch, and what things are you most interested in seeing in a diagnostic company?
Yeah. So we are active, and we have actually already made an investment in a company we actually never met physically. So we are open for business for that. So the types of companies we're interested in are generally in the diagnostic space, are generally companies which are enabling something new. So typically it's like a research tool that then has a diagnostic option associated with it. So there's some new type of measurement which is important to the field that gets a lot of the researchers excited about exploring that, and then eventually, work is done where it's identified as something that's important for a diagnosis, for a prognosis, or whatever kind of clinical use case can be made for it. And so that's how we typically jump into diagnostic companies. It's typically through some kind of enablement of a new type of measurement, usually using some kind of new kind of science that's typically discovered in an academic environment, and then spun out into a company. And that's one of the things that ARCH is known for, is helping to spin out new innovations from places like academic environments.
Okay, so breakthrough type technologies. Yeah, great. Bill.
Yeah, same. It's, and I come out of the academic side of life, spinning out companies from the academic side of it, taking that IP and developing into kind of some sort of commercial success. And so, very much what David said, that's our focus at Genoa. It's been a very interesting sort of ride. I think in early March, it was sort of worrying about your portfolio companies and sort of, sticking close to home. But as we've sort of gotten through the last, couple of months, we're in deep diligence on, several companies at the moment. So still very active. And a lot of that's being done virtually. So it hasn't stopped, and we are, we take calls all the time and love to hear pitches. And what's been, I think, good is that there's been a little bit of ability to sort of interact with some of these portfolio companies and actually give them sort of the second shot. Sometimes the first one, you don't always get it. And it's good to get the second shot. And, this modality that we're in lends itself a little better than having that in-person, one time, this is it, or make it or break it effort. And so I think those folks that are sort of intrepid and answer questions and then come back with the answers, I'm very amenable to that. So I think, is there anything specific that I'm looking for? I think I'm looking at sort of new kinds of trends. We're moving from, I think I mentioned to you guys, moving from sort of the traditional doctor's office healthcare setting to much more to home care and sort of the self-care environment. Whether somebody Ubers over a blood testing kit and Ubers it back to a clinical lab, or whether they, order from Amazon. We'll see how some of these new markets develop. And I think we're becoming more of a preventive care society than we are an acute care. It would be nice to sort of know, it'd be nice if your watch told you had COVID-2 or the flu, versus having to run to the emergency room. And so we'll see how those trends develop.
Great, that's very helpful. And Yang, what about Illumina Ventures and your activity these days and what you're looking for in a diagnostics company?
So actually, I think the last 2 months have been pretty busy. I mean, I think we've closed 3 deals in the last 2 months. However, it has to be said that all of these discussions have been initiated much prior to the kind of lockdown period. So we knew the teams already. It was, last piece of diligence that we had to do, or, entrepreneurs that we already knew from before very, very well. So, so thus my question to this group, whether you can imagine closing deals going forward without having met the team. So we are still struggling with this question going forward, but we're still very busy with the things that we're closing up. In terms of what we're looking for, I think one thing that we particularly like in diagnostic companies, because oftentimes the time to revenue, to reimbursed revenue can be very, very long. What we really like is if companies do have revenue streams prior to that. And by revenue, I mean, you know, oftentimes it can be kind of pharma partnerships or you know, source of revenue that can supplement equity funding, even if that's grant funding, right? Significant sources of grant funding can be very attractive. And with the current, you know, SARS-CoV-2 situation, I think a lot of companies have managed very successfully to leverage this to, you know, as all the guys on the panels are investing in platform technologies where you know, you get money from grant bodies to fund developing your platform that then can post-COVID be used for other purposes. So we really like platform technologies, but some revenue along the way before reimbursement would be great for diagnostics.
Excellent, that's helpful. And I would add VC23 is also active. I think, you know, my sense from talking to everyone on this panel is that venture capital firms want to stay active during this time. You know, we don't know how long this pandemic situation is going to happen, and when it'll fade. And we certainly don't want our deal activity to slow down. We want to keep our leads, the pipelines coming in with new lead opportunities, and so I think what you're hearing from this panel, which at VC23 is the same, is you know, we want to keep getting pitches from companies. We want to keep meeting new teams, and encourage you to do that. Many of us aren't traveling, and so we have a fair amount more time than we used to have flying around the country. Switching gears a little bit, but tying into the current activities, you know, there've been a lot of changes in the government over the last several months. Changes at the FDA, changes in BARDA's focus, changes in other grant issuing government and non-government groups' focus. I'd like to ask the panel their thoughts on what they're seeing in terms of the FDA and other government agencies' changes over the last few months, and what you expect over the next year or two. And Bill, why don't we start with you, and we'll head, at least on my screen, left to right this time. So Bill, then Yang, and
yeah.
And David.
You know, what's interesting for me is just, again, sort of going back to this timeline in March, you know, the FDA sort of shot out, you know, some sort of new emergency guidance for Corona test developers, and it sort of eased restrictions in many ways, and it was a panic in some cases, because we just didn't have sufficient testing. You know, the CDC and other things that we'd sort of waited on and counted for, you know, sort of missed the gap. And you know, what the QC and the guidelines were pretty lax. And what's happened now is since they overshot the mark, they sort of retrenched back, and now there's sort of new things that are coming back to put it more in line. And so I expect there'll be, you know, those just got modified in May. So the March guidelines now were modified in May, and we're starting to see this trend sort of for diagnostics sort of come back to, you know, sort of similar kinds of QC, similar kinds of validation testing, similar kinds of processes where you have SOPs, standard operating procedures, and other things that others can follow. So, you know, and the companies, the innovators in this space, I think have been sort of adopting to that. What's been interesting for me has been there's some new things around ethics, you know, how we're going to share data, what data is going to look like, even environmental considerations. You know, what's the environmental impact on some of the technologies that we're innovating around? And I like that. I like some of this new thinking that's coming in with some of these new innovations.
Great, thank you. Yang, what are your thoughts on FDA and other government changes and what you're seeing and where it's headed?
Yeah, we actually have a portfolio company that has recently got an EUA for an at-home collection kit for COVID testing in the States. The company is called Let's Get Checked. They offer at-home diagnostics. They have done STDs and, you know, vitamin panels and things like that in the past, and then pivoted quickly to COVID. And I think, you know, from their exercise, I think it has been very interesting, because the FDA has been very open, because just the test volumes were not enough. Very open to new entrants, to new ideas to do things, and get around supply restrictions with swabs, with you know, transport media and such. But because, as Bill has mentioned, they have kind of overshot at the beginning. So it seems to be a moving target from week to week. I don't know if you guys have been listening to their virtual town halls every week, but you can see that, you know, it gets more and more stringent, and the questions that are coming up, I mean, it's different timelines. People are worrying, you know, what will happen next week. So, I mean, it will change. I mean, if you're a company and you're still working on a SARS-CoV-2 test and you're going to release that in 6 months' time, that's your plan, probably the regulatory landscape will be more or less back to normal. Just thinking about the amount of tests that is coming online, right? The portfolio company I mentioned, they're at capacity of 300,000 tests, PCR-based tests per week now. And thinking about all the NGS technology, where people are talking about pooling and putting them on, you know, NGS sequencers, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, or even million samples onto a sequencer. If you think about that, right, at some point, this is not going to be the rate limiting factor anymore, the testing itself. So I would expect that some of the guidelines will come back to more kind of normal times.
Okay, makes sense. So Lily, your thoughts on FDA, BARDA, NIH, and what's going on in the government world?
I'm not sure I have too much to add on that. I think just as an individual, thinking about it, and these trends of sort of more at-home type diagnostics, I wonder if there's a need for people to have some help in figuring out if the FDA is is taking less of a closer look at some of these things. Will there be alternate mechanisms springing up to help individuals evaluate these different diagnostics and understand, well, okay, if the FDA isn't as critical, how do I know which of these 25 is good?
Yeah.
So it's just a question.
Yeah, it's a good question. We've seen a lot of questionable antibody tests out there. David, what are you seeing?
Yeah, so we've had, you know, the positive effects of some of our portfolio companies kind of working in the COVID space and being able to take advantage of some accelerated review cycles. On the other hand, we've had some negative effects with some other companies that are not in the COVID space that have kind of had their projects deprioritized. And so they've had challenges in terms of, you know, basically kind of sitting on their hands for a little bit of time, waiting for their clinical sites to reopen. So it's a mixed bag. But, you know, overall, yeah, I think I mean, we expect the the COVID opportunity to slowly fade in terms of the gold rush. And then on the other side, those companies that we have that are not in the COVID space will then kind of go back to business as usual. And so those companies are excited about that happening sooner than later.
Makes sense. We're at VC23 is seeing the same thing. You know, it's a twofold situation. We've got companies pursuing COVID and getting a lot of BARDA money, but we've got other companies working on different projects, and you know, BARDA is totally focused on COVID right now. Everything else is basically so it you know, that's something for people to think about. I think venture funders are aware that the government is pretty much just focused on COVID right now. I guess another general area is trends and trends as it relates to someone raising funds. So if you were to talk to early stage companies who are doing a fundraise, what would you tell them about what you think are the important trends that get you excited, especially in the diagnostic world, and what are things that you don't necessarily view as exciting? So I guess another way to say that is there's always things where each of us see a company that when we see an element, we get very excited. And when we see other elements, we kind of say ho hum, you know. So what are your exciting things that excite you about pitches you're seeing these days? And what are things that either scare you off or make you go ho hum? Why don't we start with Yang this time?
Yeah, I think some of the themes have been mentioned previously. I think at home is definitely something that we take a second look at the moment in particular, because people do realize that there are situations, especially at the beginning of the pandemic, where you physically can't go out, you're not allowed to go out, or you don't want to go out. So bringing diagnostics closer to the patient, closer to home is something that we definitely have a look at. But I think at the same time, the other aspect that's important for us, I think to a lot of people on this panel as well, is this platform technology angle. I mean, if the technology itself is not exciting enough, if it's, you know, merely better than what's existing already, it's probably not for us. It might be a great investment for the founder. It might be great technology. It might be, you know, good for society in general. But for us, the technology has to be exciting as well. There has to be something that is revolutionary about the platform, or changing how we think about things, how we do things. So I think that's really something, at least for us, important. So if, you know, that's just another biomarker using standard methods, that's probably not the investment for us.
Okay, Bill, your thoughts?
Yeah, you know, I see companies that sort of come to us, and there's all sorts of different flavors here. You know, you've got the wearables, and now you got invisibles. So, you know, we can take the image from the screen, and it can see how much pain you're in. It can look at the mole and tell you if you've got melanoma. You know, the things that will sort of, I guess we sort of talked, that will sort of aid in self-care. You know, the big trend for UCSF is that only, you know, before COVID, BC, is that it? There was only 4% of doctor visits were by telemedicine. Now we're at 80%. So 80% of doctor visits are, you know, Zoom calls and telemedicine. And there's no way that UCSF, at least, is going to go back to 4%. And that's going to be with us. And so, you know, innovations in that space, I think are going to be the ones to sort of look at. You know, I see wonderful development in synthetic biology and ag tech as well. That's an area General Ventures also goes in addition to diagnostics, but they lead into things that will treat us and feed us, and things that, so if you are, they may be sort of companion technology. So if you're diagnosed with, you know, high blood pressure, are there salts that, you know, don't cause high blood pressure? If you've got diabetes, are there sugars that don't initiate those pathways? And we're starting to see some of those trends, and love to look at those. And then, of course, you've got, sitting on top of this is this sort of artificial intelligence, machine learning that is really informing drug design, how we do testing. You can do testing in silico, you know, before you even pick up a pipette. And so some of those are, you know, developing sort of unique resources, and we'll see how those impact businesses going forward.
Thank you. David, what are the things that get you most excited about a new deal?
So we kind of talked about some of them before. We're looking for kind of enabling technology platforms, as Yang said. we're also interested in kind of one of the new trends or the newer trends in diagnostics, kind of multi-omics, where there's not just a single type of measurement being made. There's multiple measurements, which hopefully provides additional accuracy or sensitivity, or bring something more to the party than what was there before for some particularly difficult to diagnose situations, or maybe there's a really expensive drug that you can't seem to find a way to really isolate the population that it's going to be most effective for. And if you can bring a new diagnostic that potentially has maybe multi-omics or some other technology that can really personalize that medicine, then that's really effective. And so we're looking for those kinds of unique opportunities.
Great, thank you. And finally, Lily.
I'm echoing some of the similar thoughts. We're excited about the potential for diagnostics to become more widespread, the ability for more people to get access to more information about their bodies, make positive changes about their health. Also, excited about the potential for computational platforms to help us decipher or get more understanding of the complexity of biology and what's going on. So.
Great, thank you. So one last set of questions, I think, before we wrap up. I know we all have someone, I think it was Bill in our preparatory call, mentioned tick boxes or check boxes. We all have lists of qualifications or requirements that we look for in an investment. We've talked about a lot of things and a lot of elements already on this call to try to help early stage companies raise capital. But what are some of the things on your checklists that we haven't mentioned that they might not be the first thing that comes to mind for an entrepreneur, but it would be helpful for them to know, because at the end of the day, you're not going to invest until you can check the box.
And, for a lot of us, it comes down to, people, the management, who's involved, of course. Do they know their customer? Do they know their target market? Do they have the operation to execute on, whatever their plan might be? And, do they have IP? All those things are sort of part and parcel. And I think I think the creative entrepreneurs that are sort of leveraging, all those different aspects where they can create their own white space, if you will. I hate that word, but it's true. Someplace that they're doing something that nobody else can do, and they can define that, and they can define that opportunity commercially. Is like fundamental to venture investing. This is can they put their venture hat on, not their entrepreneur hat on, and think like a venture investor, and think about how they might return an investment and how that might work with their venture hat on. So that's a little, as they think through Series A, B, C, D, and the venture partner that's going to go along for that ride, is he going to get what he needs in the end, so that you have this sort of mutual beneficial relationship?
It's a good piece of advice for entrepreneurs to put yourself in the minds of the investor. David, what about your checklist at Arch Ventures? Anything we haven't touched on that is on your checklist of requirements?
Yeah, so I don't know if we've given enough airtime about stage. So we're an early stage investor. So if somebody comes to us with a Series C investment, that doesn't really hit the checkbox for us. So we're really most engaged when we can talk to somebody who's in the seed or Series A stage, first institutional round. That's when we get excited about an opportunity. We're certainly excited about working with people with experience who've done who have spun out technologies in the past from their lab, or an entrepreneur who's maybe done a round trip, actually started up a company, maybe sold it, made their investors money. That's always a really good sign, because we actually are in this to make some money. That we do like to do good as well. But at the end of the day, we've got to put shoes on the feet of our LPs. So So we got to make some money here. And so, so those are the, kind of the key points, I think, that, team, in real estate, it's location, location, location. For us, it's kind of team, team, team.
Good point. Turn it to Illumina Ventures. Yang, what haven't we talked about that Illumina Ventures basically requires in deal situations or company situations?
I want to add external validation in the widest sense, right? This can be external validation in terms of revenue. It can be you've done it before, you know the people, and there are people who can vouch for you. And I think, especially in the situation that we're now in now, is if you have other people that we know, right? Through our network, we know you've dealt with in the past, or your company has dealt with in the past. There's definitely a plus for us to look deeper if we haven't met you personally before. So this kind of hook is super important. And this piece of external validation that's outside of your immediate circle is something that we are looking for.
Okay, that's helpful. And Lily, I've saved you for last because then it's the hardest, because everyone else has mentioned a bunch of things, but you're obviously super smart. And so you can come up with something that no one else has talked about yet.
Thank you. So in addition to the previous comments, which I agree with, for diagnostics, a basic question I have is a clear understanding: what will people do differently if they have the information from the diagnostic? How will that change their treatment or their behavior? How will that save money, et cetera? And if you're talking about a clinical diagnostic, having a deeper understanding of the whole system in which that diagnostic would need to function, not only the interaction between a patient and a physician, but also, hospitals, laboratories, payers, nurses, technicians, like understanding that complexity sometimes, and going out and talking to those types of people to understand that real practical implementation of where would your diagnostic fit in their workflow, or how would it change it?
Great. Well, thank you. I'd like to wrap up and then turn it over to Jessica and say thank you very much to our entire panel. I've worked with most of you on deals in the past, and look forward to working with all of you going forward. And Bill, Yang, Lily, and David, I know your firms, Genoa, Illumina Ventures, OS Fund, and Arch, are all active, wonderful firms that have funded many, many companies, and you're looking to make new relationships. And you've shared a lot of good advice. I like to think that you all and I, representing VC23, have taken this time to give what we can to the entrepreneurial community in the diagnostic world for RESI, and try to impart some advice to help them, because at the end of the day, we all do need to make an investment return. But I think we're all also in this to help the world by delivering better and new products and technologies, but also help entrepreneurs to make a positive difference in the world. And so we thank you all for your time. And Jessica, I'd like to thank RESI for putting this together.